Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we're looking at the exam guide breakdown for the Solution Architect Associate. And in specific, we're talking about the SAA CO2. Now, AWS produces exam guides for all their certifications. It's a PDF that tells you what to expect for the exam. But I'm just going through here and enhancing it and saving you the time for reading that document. And the first thing I want you to know is that the passing grade is 72% or higher. That's what you need to pass. Now, AWS uses a point-based system out of 1,000, and so you're going to have to score 720 points and more to pass. Now, there are 65 questions on the exam, and you can afford to get about 18 questions wrong, so there's ample room for mistakes. And another great thing is that the exam is only an hour and 30 minutes. That means you're going to get 2 minutes per question, which is a lot of time. I find a lot of people end up getting through this very quickly in 30, 40 minutes, and they have all this time left over because they were trying to get to the end, worried about running out of time. What I always tell you to do is go back to the beginning of the exam and review all your questions so that you can make sure that you made the right choices and score a few extra points. Now, looking at how this exam is broken down, AWS breaks them based on domains or categories of questions that you'll encounter. And the first is design resilient architectures, worth 30% of the exam. You'll get 19 to 20 questions on this. Then you have design performant architectures, which is 28% of the exam, so it's 18, 19 questions. Then you have define secure applications architecture, which is worth 24% of the exam, that's 15, 16 questions. Then you have define cost optimized architectures, which is worth 18% of the exam, that's between 11 and 12 questions. Now, if you've ever taken the SAA CO1, the exam before this, it had 5 categories. And the other one was operational excellence. So what they did was they got rid of that one and then they rebalanced it. So this exam, even though there is additional content that you have to study from the old one, the great thing is that it's way more balanced and it's more fair for test takers. So I would argue that this is easier than the previous one, but you still have to study for this pretty thoroughly. So now that we looked at the domains in broad, let's break them down in detail to understand what is it that we need to learn in each of those domains. So the first domain is design resilient architectures. And so every domain has subdomains, and the first subdomain here is design a multi-tier architecture solution. What they're talking about is when you build a web application, you'll have different tiers. So you might have your database tier, your application tier, your networking tier. And so you have to know how to design all those components to work together. Then you have design highly available or fault-tolerant architectures. So this is the concept of having being highly available, making sure your service remains available. Then you have design decoupling mechanisms using AWS services. Anytime you see the word decoupling, you should think about application integration. And services that do application integration is SQS, SNS, Kinesis, okay? And maybe Event Bridge there as well. Then you have choose appropriate resilient storage. So really, resilient storage means like I put something into S3 or anywhere, and it's going to remain there. So S3 is really great because when you put a file in there, it's going to replicate it, I think, across 6 data centers. They say AZs, but it's really data centers. So there's a high chance that it will stay very resilient. Or if you need it to go to another region, you can use cross-region replication. That's an example of resilient storage. Then you have domain 2, so design high-performing architectures. The first subdomain here is identify elastic and scalable compute solutions for a workload. Anytime you see the word elastic, you should be thinking of auto-scaling groups because that is what they're talking about. Then for 2.2, we see select high-performing and scalable storage solutions for a workload. So when we're talking about scalable solutions, S3 is a great example. You put files in it. You have unlimited storage. You don't worry about it. It can take very large files as well. When you're thinking about high-performing storage, you're thinking about solid-state drives that you can get through Elastic or EBS. And so not just SSD, but also the fact that you can get higher provisioned IOPS, faster input-output per second. So that is that there. Then you have select high-performing networking solutions for a workload. When it says high-performing, we could be talking about Direct Connect, which makes it very easy to move data very fast from on-premise to the cloud. Or maybe they're talking about using gateways within AWS to keep traffic within it. Or maybe they're talking about Transfer Accelerator to get files onto AWS very quickly through CloudFront onto S3. So there's things like that. Then for the fourth or the last one here is choose high-performing database solutions for workload. Anytime we're talking about databases and we're talking about high-performing databases, it's going to be Aurora and DynamoDB. Those are the two big ones there. Then onto the third domain, we have design secure applications and architecture. So design secure access to AWS resources, the first subdomain here. They're talking about IAM, identity access management. Then you have design secure application tiers. Not really sure what they mean by that. If maybe they're talking about security groups or NACLs. So that's some ideas there. Then you have select appropriate data security options. They're just saying, hey, when you launch a hard drive, make sure it's checkboxed to be encrypted, things like that. Just make sure your security things are ticked so things are encrypted. On to the last domain here, we have design cost optimized architectures. So for the first subdomain, we have identify cost-effective storage solutions. They're talking about the S3 tiers, or using Glacier or comparing it against EFS or EBS. Then we have identify cost-effective compute and data services. So when we're talking about compute, we're comparing Lambda, EC2, Fargate, Kubernetes. Then for databases, it's between Aurora, RDS, DynamoDB, maybe Redshift will be in there as well. Design cost-optimized network architectures. Probably talking about like hybrid architectures because most networking components in AWS are very cost-effective. But generally when it's like if you're doing VPN connections or direct connect and stuff like that, that's where costs come into play. Or maybe they're just even talking about like the cost of transferring data in and out of AWS and understanding those costs there. So there you go. Those are the 4 domains. Now talking about unscored content. So you may have additional questions in your exam which are not scored. And this sounds very odd. Why would they add questions beyond the 65? And the reason AWS does this is to test out new questions or determine if they should make the exams harder or easier. So if you do see questions that you've never studied for, don't panic. Don't feel that you're off track because they're probably just these unscored questions. I know people get really stressed out. It's just like bizarre questions and they just think, all their study time has failed, but do not flinch. You're okay. You can afford to get some questions wrong. And then these ones are probably unscored. All right, so here's the actual official outline. I just pulled it up off the AWS website here. I just want to show you where I'm sourcing my information. So that is the course code, as you can see. There's the recommended knowledge, which we know not all of those things are required. Then we can see it's multiple choice, multiple responses. It talks about the unscored content. It tells us about the 720 as the passing score, and we get the domain and subdomain breakdown. And as you'll notice, they don't list white papers anymore. I assume that they just don't so that they don't have to continuously update these documents because that seemed to be an issue. They'd always have to update them. But white papers are definitely still important for study or at least the ones that I pointed out. So there you go.